If you look at the logos on the products in your house, you will see hundreds of different names. You see a diversity of brands, a variety of choices, and a competitive marketplace. You see what looks like freedom. But if you peel back the labels, follow the money upstream, and trace the ownership structures to their absolute source, you will not find diversity. You will find singularity. You will find that the food you eat, the fuel you burn, the media you consume, and the medicine you take are all controlled by a tiny handful of massive conglomerates. This structure is not an accident. It is not the natural result of free market capitalism. It is an artificial construct. It is a machine that was designed by one man in one city over 150 years ago. His name was John Davison Rockefeller. Most people know him as the richest man in history. They know him as the oil tycoon who built Standard Oil. But that is a superficial understanding. Rockefeller did not just build a company, he built a system. He invented an architecture of control that allowed him to bypass laws, crush competition, and extract wealth from the population with terrifying efficiency. And here is the terrifying part. When the United States government finally realized what he had done and tried to destroy his machine in 1911, they failed. They thought they had broken Standard Oil into pieces. In reality, they simply forced it to evolve. The system that Rockefeller engineered did not die with him. It became the operating system for the entire modern world. It is the blueprint used by Amazon. It is the blueprint used by Google. It is the blueprint used by the banking cartel and the pharmaceutical industry. You are living inside Rockefeller's dream. And today, we are going to show you exactly how the cage was built, why the doors locked, and why. Despite all your hard work, the fruit of your labor continues to flow upward to the architects of this system. To understand the machine, you must first understand the mind of the machinist. Rockefeller was born in 1839 into a world of chaos. His father, William Big Bill Rockefeller, was a traveling con artist. He sold fake cancer cures and elixirs to desperate people. He would disappear for months at a time, leaving his family destitute, only to return with a roll of cash before vanishing again. From his father, Rockefeller learned that the world was a predatory place where the gullible were eaten by the ruthless. His mother, Eliza, was the opposite. She was a deeply pious, strict Baptist. She taught John that discipline, order, and silence were the highest virtues. This contradiction, the ruthlessness of the con man mixed with the moral certainty of the zealot, created a unique psychological profile. Rockefeller did not view business as a game. He viewed it as a war against chaos. He believed, truly and deeply, that competition was a sin. He believed that competition led to waste, to price fluctuations, and to instability. He believed that God had given him a gift for making money, and that his divine mission was to take the chaotic, messy oil industry and impose total absolute order upon it. And the oil industry in the 1860s was the definition of chaos. In 1859, oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania. It triggered a black gold rush. Thousands of men flooded the valleys of Pennsylvania. They drilled wells everywhere. It was the Wild West. When a new well was struck, the supply of oil would explode, and the price would crash to pennies. When the wells ran dry, the price would skyrocket. Fortunes were made in a week and lost in an hour. It was a gambler's paradise. Rockefeller, watching from Cleveland, Ohio, looked at this chaos with disgust. He saw the drillers as fools. They were taking all the risk. They were digging holes in the ground, hoping to get lucky. Rockefeller knew that the money was not in the drilling. The money was in the refining. The crude oil coming out of the ground was useless until it was turned into kerosene for lamps. If you could control the choke point, the refinery, you controlled the industry. In 1863, at the age of 24, he bought his first refinery. But he did not just want to be a refinery owner. He wanted to be the only refinery owner. He began to execute a strategy that would become the first pillar of the Rockefeller system: extreme efficiency. His competitors were wasteful. They threw away the byproducts of refining, like gasoline and tar. Rockefeller hired scientists. He found ways to turn the tar into paving materials. He found ways to use the gasoline as fuel for his machines. He made his own barrels because buying them was too expensive. He dried his own wood. He bought his own wagons. He squeezed every single penny out of the process. He called it the good sweat. This allowed him to produce kerosene cheaper than anyone else on earth. But efficiency was not enough. To build a true empire, he needed a weapon, and that weapon was the railroad. This brings us to the second pillar of the system, the conspiracy. Cleveland was a major hub for railroads. The railroads were desperate for steady cargo. Rockefeller went to the railroad bosses, including the legendary Cornelius Vanderbilt, with a proposition. He guaranteed them a massive, steady volume of oil shipments every single day. In exchange, he demanded a secret discount or rebate on shipping costs. But he did not stop there. He also demanded a drawback. This was unheard of. Rockefeller demanded that the railroads pay him a fee for every barrel of oil shipped by his competitors. Think about how insane that is. If his competitor, Joe Smith, shipped a barrel of oil on the train, the railroad would charge Joe Smith $2. Then, the railroad would take 50 cents of that $2 and secretly give it to Rockefeller. Rockefeller was getting paid when his competitors did business. This gave him an insurmountable advantage. He could lower his prices below the cost of production. He could bleed money for months, knowing that his competitors were bleeding faster. This led to the event known as the Cleveland Massacre of 1872. In a span of 3 months, Rockefeller approached virtually every refinery in Cleveland. He made them an offer. He would open his books and show them exactly how profitable he was. He would offer to buy them out at a fair price in exchange for Standard Oil stock. He told them, "Take Standard Oil stock, and it will provide for your family forever. Refuse, and I will crush you." Most sold. Those who refused were destroyed. Rockefeller would drop the price of kerosene in their specific neighborhood until they went bankrupt. Then, he would buy their scrap metal for pennies on the dollar. By 1879, John D. Rockefeller controlled 90% of the oil refining capacity in the United States. He was 40 years old. He had conquered the market. But now, he faced a new problem. A problem that no businessman had ever faced before. He was too big. The laws of the United States were not designed for a company of this scale. At the time, corporations were chartered by individual states. Standard Oil of Ohio was only allowed to own property in Ohio. It was illegal for an Ohio company to own a company in Pennsylvania or New York. This legal barrier threatened to tear his empire apart. He needed a way to control companies across state lines without technically owning them. His lawyers came up with a solution that changed the world forever. They reinvented an old legal concept from the Middle Ages, the trust. This is the third pillar of the system, the legal shield. In 1882, the Standard Oil Trust was formed. Here is how it worked. The stockholders of all the various Standard Oil companies across the country: Standard Oil of Ohio, Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of New York handed their shares over to a group of 9 trustees led by Rockefeller. In exchange, the stockholders received trust certificates. The trustees did not technically own the companies. They just held the shares in trust. But this gave Rockefeller absolute dictatorial control over the entire national empire. He could shut down a refinery in Pennsylvania to boost prices in New York. He could price gouge in markets where he had a monopoly and lower prices in markets where he had competition. He had created a centralized government of industry. He was not elected, but he had more power than the President of the United States. The trust model was so successful that everyone copied it. Soon, there was a sugar trust, a tobacco trust, a steel trust, a meat trust. The American economy was rapidly transforming from a free market into a series of monopolies controlled by a handful of men. The public was horrified. They saw the prices of goods being manipulated. They saw small businesses being crushed. They saw the political system being bought off by bribes and lobbying. Rockefeller became the most hated man in America. Cartoons depicted him as a giant octopus, strangling the Capitol building, the White House, and the American worker. This public fury led to the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. It was a law specifically designed to destroy the trust system, but Rockefeller was always 2 steps ahead. When the courts in Ohio tried to dissolve the trust, Rockefeller simply moved his headquarters to New Jersey. New Jersey had passed a new law, allowing holding companies. A holding company is a corporation that exists solely to own shares in other corporations. It produces nothing. It sells nothing. It just owns. Rockefeller converted the Standard Oil Trust into Standard Oil of New Jersey, a massive holding company. The structure changed, but the control remained absolute. By 1904, Standard Oil was not just an American monopoly. It was a global superpower. It controlled the flow of oil from the wells of Pennsylvania to the lamps of China. Rockefeller was personally receiving millions of dollars in dividends tax-free because there was no income tax yet, but the government was closing in. In 1911, in a landmark case, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly. They ordered it to be broken up into 34 separate, independent companies. History books tell you this was the defeat of Rockefeller. They tell you this was the victory of the people over the corporation. They are lying to you. The breakup of 1911 was the greatest financial miracle of Rockefeller's life. It was the moment the system evolved from a crude monopoly into an unbreakable hydra. When the court ordered the breakup, they did not confiscate Rockefeller's wealth. They simply divided his shares. If he owned 25% of Standard Oil, he now owned 25% of Standard Oil of New Jersey, 25% of Standard Oil of New York, 25% of Standard Oil of California, and so on. He still owned it all. But now, instead of one giant company under constant scrutiny, he owned 34 competing companies. The market loved it. Investors believed that these new companies would be more agile and profitable. The stock prices of the baby standards exploded. Before the breakup, Rockefeller's net worth was estimated at around $300 million. A few years after the breakup, thanks to the rising stock prices of the new companies, his net worth had soared to nearly $1 billion. He became the world's first billionaire after the government tried to destroy him. The companies that were born from that breakup are names you know today. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. Standard Oil of Indiana became Amoco. The monopoly did not die. It just changed its name. But Rockefeller knew that money alone was not enough to secure his legacy. He needed to control the narrative. He needed to control how people thought. This brings us to the fourth and perhaps most dangerous pillar of the system: philanthropic capture. Rockefeller had a public relations problem. The world saw him as a monster. He needed to rebrand himself as a savior. In 1913, 2 years after the breakup, he established the Rockefeller Foundation. He endowed it with hundreds of millions of dollars of his oil money. On the surface, this was an act of supreme generosity. The foundation funded schools, eradicated hookworm in the South, and built libraries. But beneath the surface, the foundation was a tool for shaping society to fit the needs of the industrial machine. Take the medical industry, for example. In the early 20th century, medicine in America was a mix of homeopathy, herbal remedies, and natural cures. It was chaotic, unscientific, and crucially, it did not rely on oil-derived pharmaceuticals. The Rockefeller Foundation funded a study called the Flexner Report. This report evaluated medical schools across the country. It recommended that any school not adhering to a strict, scientific, drug-based curriculum should be shut down. Rockefeller then poured millions into the schools that adopted his standards. He effectively bought the curriculum of American medicine. The result was a medical system that focused heavily on treating symptoms with patented synthetic drugs that were often derived from petrochemicals produced by Rockefeller's companies. He did not just sell the oil. He built the medical system that required the oil derivatives. He applied the same logic to education. The General Education Board, funded by Rockefeller, poured money into the public school system. But they were not trying to create a nation of thinkers and philosophers. They needed a nation of obedient workers and punctual clerks to staff the giant bureaucracies of the corporate world. Frederick Gates, Rockefeller's advisor, famously wrote, "In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands." By the time John D. Rockefeller died in 1937, he had won. He had built the oil industry. He had built the corporate legal structure. He had built the modern banking system through his family's alliance with the Chase Bank. He had shaped the medical system. And he had integrated his wealth into a tax-exempt foundation that would allow his family to wield influence for centuries without ever paying estate taxes. So, what does this mean for you today in 2025? It means that the Rockefeller operating system is the environment in which you live. Look at the modern tech giants. Look at Amazon. Jeff Bezos followed the Rockefeller playbook line by line. Amazon spent years losing money, undercutting competitors to drive them out of business. That is the Cleveland Massacre strategy. Amazon effectively taxes the entire retail economy. If you want to sell a product online, you have to use Amazon's rails, and you have to pay Amazon a fee. That is the drawback scheme Rockefeller used with the railroads. Amazon controls the marketplace, the delivery network, and the cloud servers that its competitors run on. That is vertical integration. Look at Google. Google gives you free search, free email, and free maps. In exchange, they harvest your data to build a monopoly on advertising. They bought YouTube, they bought Android, they bought DoubleClick. That is horizontal integration. Alphabet, the parent company of Google, is a holding company, the exact structure Rockefeller popularized to evade the law. Look at the pharmaceutical industry. We see a revolving door between the regulators at the FDA and the executives at Pfizer and Moderna. The companies fund the regulators who are supposed to police them. This is the ultimate form of regulatory capture, a concept Rockefeller pioneered when he bought the Ohio State Legislature in the 1880s. The system is designed to be inescapable because efficiency demands monopoly. Rockefeller was right about one thing. Monopolies are efficient. It is much more efficient to have one power grid, one water pipe, and one search engine than to have 10. But the price of that efficiency is your freedom. The price is your ability to start a business that can compete. The price is your privacy. The price is the wealth that is siphoned off your labor and transferred to the shareholders of these megatrusts. The inflation you feel at the grocery store is part of the system. The consolidation of the housing market by private equity firms is part of the system. The fact that you can vote for a politician, but the policies never seem to change, is part of the system. The Rockefeller system is a mechanism for stability. But it is stability for the rulers, not the ruled. When you understand this, you realize that the standard advice you are given, work hard, save money, play by the rules, is advice for a game that was rigged in 1870. The people who win in this system are the ones who understand how it works. They are the ones who do not try to compete with the monopolies, but who position themselves to benefit from them. They buy the assets. They own the equity. They understand that in a world of consolidation, being a laborer is a trap, and being an owner is the only escape. The system you can never escape is not just about oil. It is about the centralization of power. Rockefeller proved that if you can control the energy, the money, and the mind, you do not need to be a king. You can be something much more powerful. You can be the man behind the curtain. The oil wells of Titusville are mostly dry now. The Standard Oil headquarters is gone. But the ghost of John D. Rockefeller stands in every boardroom, in every legislative chamber, and in every central bank meeting in the world. He taught the world how to build a cage made of gold, and we are all still sitting inside it. If you want to understand how the other architects of our modern world designed the traps we live in, you need to subscribe to this channel. We are systematically dismantling the history of financial control. In our next video, we are going to look at the man who bailed out the United States government twice, and in doing so, effectively privatized the country's money supply before the Federal Reserve even existed. His name was J.P. Morgan, and his story is the missing link between Rockefeller's industry and the money in your pocket. The system is vast, but it is not invisible. You just have to know where to look.